Oh, hi, Casey.
Oh, hi, Ren. How's your sex life?
Sometimes women are great, and sometimes they're not great. Sometimes they're flat out crazy.
You could say that again.
Hi, this is Ren.
This is Casey.
And this is All Walks of Film. So, we just saw The Disaster Artist, and we're a bit disappointed watching the film just because we fell in love with the book. And this
After falling in love with the movie, of course.
Yeah, if you haven't seen The Room, I strongly urge you, if you are even slightly interested in watching The Disaster Artist, I would highly recommend watching The Room first.
I mean, to the point where I'm really curious to see what it's like watching The Disaster Artist if you have no idea what The Room is. Because it's not really like a movie in its own right, like Ed Wood is. If you haven't seen an Ed Wood movie, it still can make sense to you. It's a lot better if you've seen Ed Wood's actual filmography, but I can get how you can watch that and still appreciate it as a movie and still really enjoy the characters and the story. But with The Disaster Artist, I don't really know what you would get out of it if you're not familiar with The Room, or Tommy Wiseau at least.
So the film starts out with this sort of recap from people who had seen The Room and talked about their experience with it and everything like that. And that's something for the fans. And quite frankly, I could understand that being in a director's cut. But in the actual film, it takes you away from that because you're constantly thinking about the original piece and not separating the movie from the work itself. And we did another podcast about this, and we got really nitpicky. So we decided to re-record and do something that gave the movie a little bit more justice instead of just savagely nitpicking it.
Yeah, because the problem isn't just the fact that it is really inaccurate to the book in a lot of capacities. The bigger problems are just overall issues with the film. Even if you're not familiar with the book at all, these are just huge underlying issues with the movie as a movie. Tommy Wiseau and Greg Sestero are really squeaky clean, just like, oh, we're just good guys, we're just goofballs, we're just friends with one another, and we're just best buds, and we get along super well, so we decide to make this movie together, and hijinks ensue, and then there's just like a little bit of a trip up, but then at the end we discovered that our real purpose in life is to provide laughter, and we were just on board with that and immediately got down with it, and that's the story. And besides the fact that that is wildly inaccurate, it's just boring. That's not interesting. They're not fleshed out two-dimensional characters. And I think that a big part of it is the fact that they're brothers in real life really did kind of hurt their relationship with one another. Because they have more of a Tommy is fucking crazy and Greg like kind of goes with it. But sometimes he's like, what the fuck, man? Because like Tommy Wiseau can sometimes just like fall apart at nothing. Like, on the spot. And they don't get into that at all. It's just, oh, they're just goofy guys who really like one another. Ha ha. They made a goofy movie. And then they, like, glossed over a lot of the really big problems with making the movie. So, the issue with that is mostly just that it's not very dramatic. And it's not very interesting. Then, the other big issue is just that, in terms of making fun of Tommy Wiseau and making fun of The Room, it's not very funny. It's not very original. You know, oh, he's fucking her belly button. Why is he fucking her belly button? Yes, literally everybody makes fun of that joke. Everybody makes fun of that scene. That's not special at all. And, I mean, they did skip over a lot of the bigger jokes, like the spoons, never addressed. The open doors, never addressed. The wobbly staircase, never addressed. Like, these big, iconic things about The Room are never addressed. But then, like, a lot of the humor is just based on, like, a really superfluous, like, oh, isn't The Room just a funny movie? Yeah, guess what? I can get that by watching The Room. And I can get that a lot better by watching the actual Room and not a fictional recreation of a true account of a real movie.
Yeah, or going to a cult showing and experiencing that with other people.
Because the jokes that people will make at cult screenings are so much funnier than anything in this movie.
This movie is so focused on the most obvious jokes that they miss a lot of moments to like really explore dynamics between characters, dynamics between actors. I mean, quite frankly, nobody in the movie is really characterized outside of Greg and Tommy. You know, like
and Chris R, because Chris R was fucking awesome. Chris R is awesome in the book and in the movie. And shout out to my boy Zac Efron for that, because I've been a fan of his since Firefly, and I conveniently ignore High School Musical. I ignore all that stuff. So to see him just like playing Chris R just blew my mind.
But that being said, the film isn't very coherent in its storytelling. It starts out really good. You know, I thought that James Franco was a little off in his performance because there was just something about it that wasn't working for me. And as the film progressed, I realized what it was. It was just, he was sort of riffing off of Tommy Wiseau. And, you know, I did some research on this, and apparently they're friends now.
Of course they are, which is why I think the movie has such a vested interest in making Tommy Wiseau and Greg Sestero look so squeaky clean. Just wholesome, funny guys who are kind of quirky, instead of really getting into their characters, their strengths and weaknesses, their flaws and their abilities. Just, no, they're just goofy guys. Haha, what a story. But like you were saying, it does have pretty much the exact same problem that I had with The Interview, which is where the intro is really strong, and they really have like a tight grip on the humor and on the storyline, and then just like as it goes, it just sort of spirals out of control and meanders, and then at the climax, there's a spark of like a serious moment where they're just going to shut up and actually talk about the serious point of the story. And then they fumble, and they just do something totally goofy, and then the ending is really anticlimactic, and then the credits roll. And you can, like, literally see in your mind's eye James Franco and Seth Rogen sitting down, and, like, with a laptop, being like, okay, we're gonna be really serious about this for the first 5 minutes, and then be like, oh, we're stuck, we need some inspiration, let's roll a blunt, and, like, let's get high. And then they're writing it really high, and then at a certain point they're like, oh yeah, and this is what the thesis was, but now they're still really high and they can't deliver it. And then that's just what they do for production. You know, they have fun making movies that aren't that interesting.
It was one of those films that, I know that the reception to this movie has been pretty great, and, you know, quite frankly, if you enjoyed this film, that's okay. But it, to me, just felt like there wasn't enough motivation or drive to make this film. I think one of the most egregious sins of this movie is the fact that it really doesn't feel like James Franco respected Tommy in his performance. In every single recreation of the badly performed scenes in the movie, he took it up 3 notches, maybe 4.
And it wasn't that he was making it weird, actually. He's not nearly as weird as Tommy. But you can tell in, like, at the end of the movie, they do side-by-side recreations of, like, the original The Room and their version. So you can see, like, oh, look at how closely everyone tried to emulate everything. And the person who is always the most off is James Franco. Because he's always trying to make a silly face, or take things too long, or he's too bland in his delivery.
Tommy Wiseau is one of those guys that you need a really good actor to portray him. Otherwise, it's going to come off not working. And at least for me, James Franco wasn't cutting it. I don't think he has the chops to do it. Because one of the things that I think the movie really fails to do is really emphasize his sincerity. Because Tommy Wiseau is a very caring person. Also, you can see in his performance in The Room that he legitimately cares about these scenes. He just sucks at it.
Mm-hmm. And there's like a special level you need to get to acting-wise to convey that ambition and that sincerity against your ineptitude and your frustrations at the people who are laughing at you. That takes a real dramatic talent, not just, oh, hi, Mark.
Yeah, and it's a lot more than just imitating the way that he talks, which is what the movie kind of slavishly does, but like James Franco can't even cut it on that level either.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a big part of the reason why there's any Oscar buzz is because, like, oh, he is able to imitate Tommy Wiseau's accent. Greg Sestero can really imitate Tommy Wiseau's accent, and he cares a lot more about Tommy Wiseau than... I mean, give Greg Sestero an Oscar for his audiobook. I mean, I don't... Doing an... No. My point is that an accent doesn't cut it. Just because you can imitate a very bizarre mixed accent doesn't mean that you're doing acting. You know, that's like the Donald Glover shows up and forgets how to act level of acting. If you've seen his stand-up Weirdo, where, you know, he talks about how to audition, you have to prove that you can act. Like, you're going to show up to set one day and be like, is this acting? I don't know. It's not important.
So, I came to the film really skeptical because I saw the trailer and it wasn't working for me. Seeing the film, it pretty much lived up to my fears of it. Granted, I thought it was a better film than I expected it to be, but I was still significantly underwhelmed by it.
Yeah, I was definitely underwhelmed by it, and the nitpicky aspects were ruining the movie for me because they cut the most dramatic elements from the book and the funniest elements from the book. Like, one scene I was dying to see in the movie, because reading it in the book, it's so funny, you just have to see it, is the scene in the flower shop where they're doing like this guerrilla filmmaking and they've been there for like 2 or 3 hours and they're on like the 20th take, and the line where Tommy Wiseau says, "Oh, hi, doggy," in real life, everyone thought that that was like a porcelain dog because he didn't move the entire time they were there. So that take is him in real time realizing that that is an actual dog. I mean, like, "Oh, hi, doggy. You're a real doggy." And I was, like, waiting for that scene, and they have the scene and they don't. Like, really funny, weird stuff like that. Completely cut. The whole thing with his sex scene with Lisa, where he stretched that out for 6 days on one scene. Not even addressed. A lot of the issues that Tommy and Greg Sestero had in filmmaking, not even addressed. The fact that Greg Sestero was roped into being a line producer on the movie, not even addressed. You know, these are like really big tentpoles in the story of the making of The Room that are just like brushed off to the side to mug on James Franco. But then even a lot of the scenes to mug on James Franco aren't really done right, because you have all these elements like, oh, Greg Sestero shows Tommy, you know, the James Dean movie Rebel Without a Cause, which in real life is his favorite movie. And the fact that in real life, he could not for the life of him say that "you're tearing me apart, Lisa," on set as a quote from one of his favorite movies. That is a lot more interesting than the scene on the rooftop, which is the one they chose to do.
Yeah, and the scene on the rooftop is YouTube famous. I get it. When anybody tries to tell anybody about The Room, it's not the "you're tearing me apart" scene that they show. It's usually that rooftop scene where he has the water bottle and he says, "I did not hit her."
But which one is speaking more to Tommy Wiseau as a person between those two scenes? That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, also, which one harkens back to a different scene? Like, even if you're going to not be slavishly accurate, which this movie wasn't, narratively, to have a through line, that would have worked. And I know that the movie didn't really address this, but there was a whole thing in the book about the talented Mr. Ripley. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they brought it up in the movie made me feel that, well, if you're not going to go into further depths about this, then you shouldn't have included it in your movie.
Right. And these are all things that, like, if you've read the book, you see them in the movie, but they're not, like, fun Easter eggs. They just get frustrating because it's showing how fundamentally you're misunderstanding these real-life people in this actual story. You know, that we all have a book and a movie to compare it to.
And I understand that it's not an adaptation. It's more of a loose interpretation of it, but...
It's not an interesting loose interpretation, though. It's piggybacking off The Room, but it's not doing anything more with it. It's not interesting.
Yeah, and it's not as fun as watching The Room.
No, it's not. And the reason why I really think a lot of it was sort of pivoted around trying to make Tommy Wiseau look more, oh, cute and quirky, without really getting into his characters, at the end of the movie, they have like this little tagline that says, "To this day, nobody knows how old Tommy Wiseau is, where he's from, or how he made his money." That is the most ridiculous thing ever, because that feeds into Tommy's whole thing of like, don't talk about me. Don't ask me questions about me. We know all these things. He's most likely from Poland. And if not, he's from Eastern Europe. He lived in Paris, France for a long time until he had an incident of sexual abuse and or rape. He immigrated to America, where he did live in New Orleans for a while. He started like selling like these little toys, like bird toys and little toy boats, and picked up a business selling odd size secondhand jeans. And I was surprised that this didn't make it into the movie at all, because there's a really funny commercial of him doing the to be or not to be my jeans, you know, he's in like the frilly shirt with the candelabra and all this stuff selling jeans in a commercial that's on YouTube. Nothing about that. But he mostly made his money from jeans, and then he also started buying up properties in LA and leasing and renting them out. That's how he made most of his money. We know these things. We also know that he's around his 60s or 70s because he was probably born in the 1950s. You know, I know that's not accurate, like pinpoint accurate, but within 10 years, like, we have an idea he's older than 60. We know these things. They're on his Wikipedia page. They're in the book. Why are you trying to say, like, oh, to this day, nobody knows? But that was also a big missed opportunity to get into Tommy Wiseau as a person. Who is he? No, we need to keep him all mysterious and goofy and lighthearted instead of actually making him a real person.
Well, and my thing is, if you're going to do that, then you should make the movie about Greg Sestero and the crew.
Yeah, where it's like all about them trying to figure it out. You know, and that was actually one of the only two scenes in the whole movie that I really liked, was there is a scene where they're taking lunch and they're like, I think that this movie is autobiographical, which is true. You know, and they're sort of like, oh, is there like a real Mark? Is there like a real Lisa? And they're like spitballing their ideas about it. That would be way more interesting, like the mystery of Tommy Wiseau. You could play it up that way and not have it be slavishly accurate to the book, and that would be fine, and that would be really interesting. But they didn't do that.
Yeah, also, the fact that there's so much time devoted to Tommy Wiseau's quirks, but not kind of batting back and forth, making him a fleshed out character, makes some of the more heartbreaking moments really fall flat. Especially the scene near the end of the film where he's watching his movie and everyone's laughing and you can see the tears in his eyes. That scene almost worked if they didn't ruin it
immediately afterwards.
And I get the reason why you want to do that, because you want to shorten it up, make it nice and clean, not dwell on this sad moment, because, you know, this is a comedy movie. You know, you don't want to feel sad. But, like, to me, after reading the book, I was okay with that. I was okay with feeling sad for Tommy Wiseau, because I feel that my enjoyment and laughter of the room was much at the expense of Tommy Wiseau. So to flesh him out more humanizes him. And I feel that James Franco, as the writer, director, producer, and star, notice anything similar there? Did not do that with Tommy Wiseau.
Yeah, and that's where the movie completely falls apart. And it is an issue with The Disaster Artist as a film. Completely separate from The Room and completely separate from the book.
Yeah, even if you wanted to take Tommy Wiseau and, just make up complete fabricated stories and stuff like that, that would still be better if you humanized him. So, overall, I would give this movie about a B-. I thought that there were funny moments in the film, but I feel that much of my enjoyment of the film was just my nostalgia for watching and experiencing The Room. So this movie didn't really add much to that experience. In fact, I would say that to a certain extent, it detracted from it.
I agree. And even that post-credit scene with Tommy Wiseau and Tommy Wiseau was like so stonery, meandering. Like at first I was like, oh, that's really cute and funny. And by the end of the scene, I was like, good, it's over. Nothing happened.
Yeah.
For me, it's a C-. The writing is subpar. If you're familiar with any of the source material, it's just not nearly as interesting. It's not very funny. It's not very deep. It doesn't evoke anything in particular. It's just... meh. And I've heard some people say, like, oh, well, it has heart and it captures the spirit of the book, but I don't really think so. I do think a lot of it is banking on the nostalgia of the movie.
So we have a Patreon account, and on our Patreon account, we have our first take of The Disaster Artist, which is a lot more nitpicky, and we ultimately decided to scrap it as far as something we'd make open to the public. But if you want to listen to us nitpick about the movie and talk about our frustrations with, the inaccuracies, then for anyone who donates $1 or more a month, you'll have access to that podcast. We also have an exclusive Frozen podcast, as well as exclusive commentaries such as our commentary on Showgirls. Any podcast we do is released on Patreon first. So if you want early access to our podcast, that's where you'll go. We also have an Amazon affiliate link, so if you want to support us that way, the link is in the description. So leave your comments below, and thank you so much for listening.